morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, soon to be a part of the Roku TV network. Live from PBS Carolina studios, where I just recorded Black Issues Forum with Deborah Holt Noel. On this show, we talk about global affairs, innovation, and as we transition to a new show on TV, we'll be bringing in guests to talk about democracy, what we're doing around the world to navigate through this pandemic, the Omicron variant, and the future of a post-COVID world and economy. But today, I will always begin from PBS Carolina on a monologue that brings up issues that we talked about today. Today, I want to talk about the filibuster. For those of you around the world and around the country watching, Senator Sinema of the United States Senate just announced that she will no longer support abandoning the filibuster rule, which would make it pretty much Joe Biden's Freedom Vote Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act dead on arrival. Now, what is the filibuster? Why is it supported by some? What are some of the benefits of it? Well, the filibuster simply means this if you're listening around the world. It means that in order to get anything done in the United States Senate, you need 60 votes, a supermajority. If a person on the minority party, in this case the Republicans, did not like what you wanted, they would basically filibuster. The filibuster could then stop the legislation. Now, the people for this, including Senator Joe Manchin, say that the filibuster would actually enable compromise, bipartisanship, that you would be able to work across the aisle to get things done because you knew you needed to get the 60 votes. But the fact of the matter is the filibuster simply just hasn't worked that way. When Mitch McConnell was president of the Senate, or was the majority leader of the Senate, he issued the filibuster 92 times, much of it during Obama's presidency. Today, many people don't realize the filibuster can be done just by simply an email, and automatically the process would begin to block any legislation that the majority party wants. It's basically minority rule. I've read up on what other democracies do or how they require supermajorities. Most democracies, including India, Denmark, other countries, only turn to a supermajority if they want to amend the Constitution. But a true democracy is one where majority rule is the rule of the day. A simple majority vote will get the legislation passed. Senator Sinema questions the fact of getting rid of the filibuster because she believes it would give too much control to one party and that would add to the divisiveness of this nation. As I close out my monologue, my concern is this. I think there are times in American history when a president and a Congress and the Senate must come together. They must come together to do what is right for the American people. This has happened when Lyndon Johnson was president, when he actually got the Voting Rights Act legislation passed and the Civil Rights legislation passed. And he did this by working across the aisle, but also getting Southern Democrats who were against civil rights movements and civil rights legislation, and he got them to join with him. Republican presidents have actually supported voter rights legislation. George Bush, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, President Richard Nixon, and others have all gotten behind basic fundamental voting rights, early voting, mail-in ballot voting, ending partisan gerrymandering, but most importantly, through the John Lewis Act, having federal standards that would prevent states from changing the electoral college rules, from doing things that are affecting the outcomes of elections, which we've talked about on this show. My challenge to Senator Sinema is this. If you don't want to have the filibuster end, that's fine. But what will you offer to compromise a bill that can get through? Debate is fine. Words are fine. But I believe if the American people really want to see their Congress and Senate work, we need to see that actions speak louder than words. The filibuster actually comes from the word freebooter, which many of us think of pirates and obstructing justice. That was not the intent of a filibuster. Let's have a conversation today about voting rights, the Freedom to Vote Rights Act, and as we prepare for MLK Day, the life and legacy of Dr. King. We'll be talking about the King family's response to the inability of passing voting rights legislation, calling for a day of action rather than a day of service. We'll be talking about that, Maya Angelou on the coin, and other issues today from the PBS studio here on World Edition. Now let's get started. Today we have with us Mark Lee, my co-host and producer, radio celebrity of Online Dinner Party, soon to be a Roku star. I see his picture on the TV all the time now as I playing with the device. Still buffering, but you made prime time, my friend.
All right.
We have
We've also got Sasha Star with us from down from over in Canada.
Morning.
She's definitely a great investor and also a master chess player and just an amazingly great guy overall and all of that. So he's just an amazing person and glad to have him join us as well.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, folks. And we basically talked about those three issues today with the content changing on, and then we're going to, at the 30-minute mark, talk about some other big national news and global news. But I'll just start with the history of the filibuster. So the one thing I forgot in my monologue is that the you know the filibuster has been used in the past to strike down or oppose civil rights legislation.
Mhm.
It's been used to block legislation. The intent is to force compromise so that, if you want to get the 60 votes, that you would actually have a process where you would maybe give a little bit on your position and reach out. But in this case, the filibuster is being used as a blocking tactic. Now, Sasha, what is your thought of the filibuster with a Canadian perspective? This whole idea of majority rule doesn't exist in the U.S. Senate. Most people don't realize that. You can't get anything done today without the super majority. So it's really power of the minority that's stopping what the country needs. What is your thoughts on that?
I think it's a terrible option to conduct business using the tactics which enforce the minority will on the ruling party. And I think, just to digress a little bit, I think the Biden's catastrophic performance comes out of his belief and not unfounded one that he has majority votes if needed in Senate and in the House, and therefore he could progress certain agenda. And what he didn't count on, the two people, the Joe Manchin and Cinema, can derail all of that momentarily down to zero. The man has no majority anywhere, especially in Senate. He's now politically dead meat. He cannot do anything, and I think the party, um, Liberal Party, they have to now look for a new leader. Frankly, it's just becoming really incredible that he has only 30% or so of approval rating. That's not the way to do it. And actually, the dynamic of it comes down. It comes slowly down. If he was in low 40s just a few months ago, now it's low 30s. How how he's going to conduct his remaining 2.5 years or so, it remains to be seen. The filibuster just contributes to his poor performance, big time.
Yes. Now, Mark Lee, before we get into some of the MLK stuff, I mean, and we're going to talk about the King family's response. First of all, real quickly, what are your thoughts about the filibuster? And, it doesn't look like the vote, for those of you listening, there's basically two bills, but really it's one bill, the Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, and uh, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. What the John Lewis Act does basically is it creates federal standards, so states just can't come in and change election laws. There's other things it does, and if you made changes in voter ID, there would be certain federal standards that you would have to agree to, and then the voting rights, the Freedom to Vote Act, is doing the basic things of mail-in balloting, early voting, uh, you know, uh, ending partisan gerrymandering. Do you believe that in this case, Mark, that the filibuster is just something that we should maybe change the process so that when you have stuff like this that's critical to the country, that you wouldn't just require a filibuster every time? Or do you think Senator Sinema is correct and that we don't end the filibuster?
We should have been changing the filibuster a long time ago. We should have been changing the filibuster probably several decades ago. It's been a tactic that has been used by a lot of folks to delay and, in some cases, derail some very significant legislation and things along those lines. You talked about Martin Luther King, and there was actually an icon to some people, not an icon to me, but an icon to some people that was from here in North Carolina that actually was a master of the filibuster when he was living, that being the late Jesse Helms, and he actually had a filibuster against the Martin Luther King holiday way back in the early 80s. So it's something that's been a tool used by a lot of folks to stop things that they did not approve of. So he used it way back in 1983 to have a filibuster against a holiday that is now out there. And of course, he was known as Senator No. So he had several filibusters during his life and everything. And he's just one example that is no longer in office and no longer even alive. But definitely, there are others that are still around and others that have used the tactic on a regular basis. So, like I said, I've never been a big fan of the filibuster because you can sit there and you orate and talk and just kind of go on and on and on and never actually do anything but disrupt the process and things along those lines. So I think that there's got to be a way to limit some of this kind of harsh tactics that have been going on for a number of decades.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a good point, and I think at the end of the day, it doesn't look now. So it's where we're going to go to the next. We're going to talk about MLK for a few minutes, but the bottom line is this: it looks like the bills are dead on arrival. Uh, Now Senator Schumer is saying he's going to bring it back to debate. The only other option is that they combine the efforts of what was in the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Act with other things that we've talked about in the show, which never seem to get mentioned, which is federal laws that would prevent uh, affecting the outcomes of elections. And so, I'll end with this. Senator Sinema kept saying, "Well, let the courts decide this." No, we don't want the courts to decide this. The United States needs to decide this. The Senate and the Congress need to decide this, and there needs to be federal standards in place that we can agree upon. That states cannot just come in and affect our national elections, and that's what I think is not being conveyed effectively to the American people. And my thing is, for those of you that criticize me that I'm only saying this because I'm a Democrat, the same standard would be held for Democrats who are in power.
Mhm.
So I'll end with that, and we're going to continue our conversation. But let's shift the gear now to Martin Luther King weekend. My closing monologue will be dedicated to MLK, and we're going to open up on Monday with a very special guest,
Yeah.
Senator Floyd McKissick, former North Carolina State Senator and the son of Floyd McKissick Sr., a civil rights leader and close friend of Dr. King. There was some breaking news by Bernice King
Mhm.
about them not participating in the MLK Day of Service on Monday because they were disappointed that voting rights legislation had not been passed. So she made it a day of action, saying either don't take the day off or do something. But before we ask you about that opinion, I would like to have each of you, we're going to start with Mark Lee as a black man. What does MLK mean to you? And we're going to probably talk about this on Monday. What does it mean to you now? And how do you think we need to be looking at his life and his legacy differently now? Not differently, but putting it in perspective.
Well, I mean, as I've said a couple of times on this show before, a lot of the issues that he was talking about and dealing with are still issues that are still prevalent today, whether that's the state of education in the African American community, the state of economics in the African American community, whether that's the state of just overall economics, whether that's fairness in politics, whether that's issues around international affairs, because he was actually even talking about Vietnam during his life and everything, or whether that's even some things in terms of housing and things that might be considered infrastructure kind of ideals within certain minority communities. All of these are things that are still being talked about in 2022. Several decades after his passing and everything. So definitely his legacy is still very much relevant to today. And a lot of folks are still, listening to what he had to say, but even some of his famous speeches, they're wondering how close we are to that actuality. And those things that he was saying that he saw when he went to that mountaintop and everything. Definitely, we've seen some things around even race relations that are very similar to what was going on in the 60s and the 70s. So it just seemed like we have maybe steps away from some of the things that Dr. King thought that he would have seen by now, in my mind and everything. But of course, I'm very much anxious to hear what Mr. McKissick has to say about that as well. But as I stated, I believe it was yesterday, I do remember one of his books, which was about chaos and community and which way we were going to go and all of that. And even writing a book or a term paper, I guess is what it would be considered, like a paper in order to get into a journalism program about that. And definitely some of the things I wrote in 1979 are still relevant in 2022.
Now, Sasha, thank you, Mark. And so we're going to continue to have those discussions on Monday. As we get to prepare and begin our weekend of MLK remembrance, with the big ones being on Monday, what is the thought of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in Canada?
Well, I've arrived to Canada from Soviet Union already after tragic death of Dr. King. So I can gather only what I've learned through books, history, and obviously he was a remarkable man. He was a towering figure in American black politics, if you will. I'm surprised that now, after so many years since he tragically was killed, there is no equal person of his stature at all. And that's another reason why his memory should be cherished by all people.
Yes, I mean, Sasha, thank you so much. And Nick Paudiva, please chime in. We're getting ready to build up for the. I'm greeting you live, Nick, from PBS Carolina. It feels good to actually feel like a real journalist today. But we're talking about MLK weekend. But before we do that, I just want to get Nick Paudiva's thoughts about the filibuster. Do you believe that it's lost its course in America and that it's being used too much? Or do you think it's a good thing to have the filibuster so you can encourage compromise?
I don't like it. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's me. In other words, I'm not a filibuster fan. I think it's horrible that on either side, that one side can sit and I'm just going to talk forever because I'm going to throw a temper tantrum because I don't like having people having a chance to vote on things. So I'm not a fan. You know,
I think, on paper.
Hey, listen, Steve, do you like your kids throwing temper tantrums?
Congresswoman Glenmore told my colleague.
Okay, I don't either. Next. So to me, it's pretty easy.
So talk to me about MLK, Nick. I mean, as a lawyer and
I have a dream. Okay, I made money off of MLK, maybe. So I like MLK because he had this speech a long time ago. I have a dream speech. So I was in the National Forensic League, okay, when I was in school. And I took his speech and I used it to win $100, like no kidding, when I was a ninth grader, beating out all the seniors in our high school by basically presenting as I have a dream speech. So and if you ever read it, it's actually a really good speech. And I was going, did he write that? And from what I understand, he actually even wrote the speech, which is incredible. Because if you ever go through that and if you ever present that speech, it's just a great speech. So MLK, I'm all favored. I made money off of him. I never sent him a royalty check. I should say, you got a great speech. Here's your commission, because I used it to make $100 back when I was in high school, which is like 40 years ago. $100 was a lot of money for giving a speech. I felt good about it. You know?
Absolutely. Now let's go to the next topic real quickly. We're going to do
Mark wants a commission.
Mark,
no, not a commission. I said I used this speech as well to write a paper. But Sasha had actually mentioned earlier that there is nobody of his stature and things of that nature, and I would agree that there's probably nobody as big, but there are some folks that are probably close to it, if not quite at that stature, including one that's right here from North Carolina, because Reverend Barber has actually asked in the midterm elections what it would be like if we had a massive turnout of the poor and the lack of a better term, some of the other disenfranchised, I think he said poor and low wealth people in the midterm election. So it does sound like that is part of what he's going to be pushing for in his new poor people's campaign that he has recently launched not that long ago and everything, which is actually a play off of the poor people's campaign that Dr. King did. So he's actually modeling some of what he's doing off of Dr. King. And of course, like I said, he is from here in North Carolina. So he is one that is a national figure that is maybe similar to Dr. King. Some people may argue Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and others that are still around. But I would argue that Reverend Barber is somebody that is trying to at least put himself on a similar kind of stage. And he has definitely put it out even recently that he would love to see a real turnout of people that have been disenfranchised in these upcoming midterm elections.
Yeah, I think he is a real great leader, and there are other figures that have been inspiring in the United States. You know, him being one of them. I think also you have Desmond Tutu, you know, who just passed away, was an inspiration. You've had other leaders like King. I often call them the moral Jedi, like the Star Wars series,
Center for
leaders
American
that were able to change the world and often pursue causes that were not popular at the time. I think it's a lot harder to do that now in the social media age, where no matter whatever you do, you're dealing with enemies on all fronts, opponents on all fronts, right?
And that is one of the things that are different from Dr. King's age and this age. We do know that both of Dr. King, Malcolm X, a lot of the other civil rights leaders of that time were had some things that were said about them during the time of their living and everything. Some that might have been proven, some that might have been disproven. But unfortunately, in this age of social media, if there's any allegation, it is automatically out there. I mean, there have been allegations against some of the things that have been done by Reverend Barber. There have been allegations against, of course, Jesse Jackson. There have been allegations of a number of others out there as well. But it is a lot easier to put those kind of like thoughts out there and put that kind of information out there, no matter how credible it is, because of social media. I know that that's something we oftentimes talk about on Media Monday, is that it is much easier to attack somebody in this day and time than it was before.
Now let's go to the next area, which is interesting. So Dr. King's daughter, Bernice King, who's the CEO of the King Foundation, has now said that she wants to, that they've decided not to call for a day of service, and they call for a day of action, and they're very upset that people haven't been pursuing the voting rights legislation. What are your thoughts about that, Sasha? Do you think it's? I mean, I know you don't really have a dog in the fight being in Canada, but do you believe that that's fair for the King family to say that? So they're not saying don't celebrate his legacy, but they're saying let's have a day of action and get people to pass voting rights legislation.
I think she's absolutely right, because it's a viable topic today. And I think she should go even farther to say that this is cornerstone of all American political life today, because without access to voting rights, there's no democracy in America at all, not for blacks or whites or Hispanics or Latinos or anybody. Because if you exclude a large proportion of people from voting, so only those selective few will be able to vote and many others not, what kind of democracy it is? So it would be like a two-tier country. The first tier, those who will vote, and second tier, those who don't vote, and therefore they don't have any rights, and their voice is not being heard. This is absolutely incredible, and I think she's absolutely right to emphasize this point.
Thank you, Sasha. Mark Lee, you concur?
I thoroughly agree. I think that definitely having a day of action is a wonderful thing. I've seen days of action on Dr. King's holiday. I've seen it on other holidays as well, and a day of action is actually in my mind, actually living in the legacy of Dr. King because he was a man of action. So I think that asking people to actually, put their actions out there and actually, just don't give it lip service, but actually do something is a wonderful idea. And I concur that that is a positive thing to do and all of that. But speaking of actions and everything, and I might be pivoting the conversation slightly, in that sense and everything. There was an action, you mentioned the Supreme Court earlier, that a lot of people are wondering about, and it actually deals with the vaccine because
Yes.
apparently, several U.S. businesses were saying that they wanted to mandate that their employees actually get the vaccine and all of that. And the Supreme Court has come out and said, nope, can't do that, U.S. businesses. You cannot do that. And if folks don't want to get vaccinated, you don't have the right to tell them that or something along those effects. But I was just wondering your thoughts on that, Steve, because I was actually somewhat surprised by that Supreme Court ruling, but maybe
Well,
you were not.
I'm not happy about it. It's obviously not a surprise. I mean, the court obviously, and I've said this time and time again, in the United States, we call them the Supreme Nine, and these just are jurists that are making decisions that are going to last for a very, very long time. And President Trump appointed three, and they're life appointments. But my concern is that I think that the fact is that I think if it's going to keep people healthier, and we've mandated vaccines before, and the data does show that you're 88% less likely to get COVID or even Omicron if you had the vaccines, two shots and a booster. So if you want to bring people back to work, how can you do that if you don't force them to get vaccinated? Because you don't know whether they're causing the Omicron variant to spread or whatever variant they have. And so, Mark, I think that I disagree with the court, but the point I'm trying to make is this: the court's already making up their mind when they're making these decisions. Okay, so when you look at voting, when you look at abortion, and now this, they're going to make it. I have to go back and read the opinions. They're going to make it about freedom. I don't know what constitutionality, what it is, but Supreme Court Gorsuch was the only Republican justice to not wear a mask. Okay, and they've been talking about that. But anyway, Sasha, what are your thoughts about vaccine mandates? And I want to go to Nick, our lawyer.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, earlier, somebody said about Senator Sinema, who is insisting that we were discussing filibuster issues, that in case of filibuster issue, everything would have to go to Supreme Court. So therefore, I even don't understand why you would continue to pay your senators if they cannot solve any question at all. I will just let them all go and revoke their free parking at the Washington airport just as well, and just get anything to Supreme Court. Let Supreme Court rule. So this is absolutely absurd.
And Sasha, that was the point. Sasha, that was the point I was trying to make. Is that it becomes a very dangerous. Well, let me go to Nick Powder. Nick, as a lawyer, someone that understands jurisprudence, do you believe we're headed down a dangerous situation with courts, basically, like Sasha Starr said, becoming they're becoming like policymakers? Isn't a justice's job to interpret the law, or are they interpreting the law? It doesn't seem like that to me. The last three decisions have been down the line.
Well, the thing is,
every time.
Remember, they have a lot of latitude because the thing is, they can always argue due process of law or equal protection. In other words, very vague statements that bring it under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, which is the ultimate arbitrator of the law. Okay, so let's take a look at these two decisions that look schizophrenic at first. One was by an administrative agency called OSHA that applied to private industries that mandated the vaccine. In that particular case, they said this is an overreach by basically the government, but specifically the executive branch. Because if you think about this, if you're in business, which I am, you get administrative rulings all the time that were never passed by Congress directly. Instead, what happens if you read this, and this is part of the big antsy about the Chevron doctrine, they call it, the administrative agency can just make up the rules. In other words, the vaccine mandate was not passed through Congress. It was passed through OSHA. A big difference. OSHA says mandates to the businesses you have to wear
Right.
masks, and this is what the Supreme Court objected to, and possibly rightfully so, because it puts the power not in Congress, but in front of a bunch of what they call bureaucrats. All right, now let's go look at the other decision. The other decision related to Medicare and Medicaid that's funded by Congress. And what they said is because they're receiving government subsidies, that they have the ability, the administrative agency has the ability to force the mandate of the vaccine, the mandate of vaccine on the employees because they're basically being subsidized by the federal government. And that's kind of how they split the baby in two right now with these two decisions. I briefly went through both of them this morning, and I was going, that's kind of interesting how they did it. Now, if you're a pure constitutionalist, and we threw it all lawyers dead, you're going to hear them going different directions. They're going like, wait a minute, show me in the Constitution vaccine mandates. It doesn't exist. I mean, come on. It's basically it's a stretch for them to be involved in it. But at the same time, I can see that they could be. And so this is where we're at right now. So if you're practical, where is it? If you're a private industry, you could, like American Airlines, mandate it for all your employees. So American Airlines could still do it. But OSHA, the government agency, can't tell American Airlines to do it. American Airlines has to do it.
Well,
Or
Nick,
not
this is very helpful, and I think we probably have more of this discussion on lawyers then. But I think the fact is that these are really important decisions, and we often don't talk enough about the Supreme Court. But we often forget that this court was overturned Brown versus Board of Education.
Sure. Yeah.
They overturned. They implemented Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Surprisingly, they actually upheld gay marriage.
Yeah.
And they also upheld the Affordable Care Act.
Sure.
The reason I say that is that those are specific examples of the court not being partisan, and even conservative justices, Chief Justice Roberts including. Although lately it seems like you have another trend about them coming in and saying, "Well, I'm upholding voting." Legislation. Sasha, what are your thoughts about our high court before we go to the next issue?
Do they have a high court in Canada?
Yeah, they do.
No, we have a Supreme Court of Canada, and but it's just a judicial body that decides some legal discrepancies or legal cases where there has to be a certain opinion voiced, and that would end the dispute if there is such. But they're not any part of legislative or executive branch so-called process. They're completely out of it and should be, in my opinion.
Hey, Nick, I did have a quick question for you and everything, which is that I've got friends that are definitely in that category of not wanting to get the vaccine for whatever reasons and everything, but they are sometimes in jobs that are very much, have more than one employee and things along those lines. So I was just wondering, and from a legal standpoint, should there be some sort of rule that who is vaccinated and who is not vaccinated? And if there is not such a rule, how can you not put yourself in jeopardy in that sense? Because I'm going like, if there's 75% that are vaccinated and let's say 25 that are not, or something like that. I think that's the figures that I last heard, or something in that ballpark and everything. How can you, if you're working for a major corporation, if you're working for a agency that hires or employs hundreds, if not thousands, how can you know who is and who isn't?
Well, you can't. I mean, that's also one of the problems. I'm just going to give my experience when I was in Italy this summer. Mm-hmm. Italy required what they call a vax card. So we put our vaccination card on our cell phones so we could get in and out of museums. And they also required masks. So they had two requirements if you want to go visit all the museums and the churches there. I thought they were reasonable requirements, especially given the COVID-19 Delta variant back then. People don't want to be, quote, told what to do. And so the thing is, they don't want to wear the mask. They don't want a vaccine. Please don't tell me what to do. And I perfectly agreed. But then should they be out in public? In other words, because they become a potential spreader. And that's where I run into a little bit of a problem here. If you could walk around in Italy without your mask, no problem. You don't have to show your Vax card. But the minute you go into an indoor situation, the rules change because your ability to contaminate other people increases dramatically. And so that's where they required the Vax card and they required the mask. And to me, that was a very reasonable thing to do, Mark. So let's say they're working for a company and they're outdoors in a truck far, far away from people. Do they really need to wear a mask? I don't think so. They need to show their Vax card? Probably not. But let's say they decide they're going to go inside a place and they're surrounded by people, then that's a whole different story. So like in New York, I already got notified that the 2 shows that we're seeing requires mask and Vax cards. I mean, to me, that's a reasonable restriction that you would place on that. What I think the Supreme Court didn't want is the blanket by an administrative agency, because if you're sitting out there on an oil field, okay, there's not a person around you in the middle of Kansas, and you have to wear a mask. That doesn't make any sense. You see what I mean? So we just have to have some sense. Where you're walking around my community, you don't need a mask. Come on, that's ridiculous. But if you're in these other situations, then it makes sense.
I hate wearing a mask. I feel
I do too. It's not my favorite thing.
Oh.
It's not my favorite thing to do is to wear a mask. Being asthmatic, I have a hard time breathing anyway. Put a mask on me, it just makes it more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not a fun thing. But I also see the necessity that if I'm going to go into a closed room with a bunch of people, a good idea to wear the mask. I mean, when I was flying on airplanes,
I only joke.
they required the mask, and airplanes required the mask, the Vax card, and a test to get on.
Well,
Okay.
I joke with my father that growing up as a kid, I wish I'd been able to wear a mask because as one of his more mischievous sons, there were times where I didn't want to be Dr. Rao's son, and I would, if I had a mask, I could walk around in Charleston, West Virginia, and no one would know who I was. But unfortunately, I didn't have a mask, and people would know who I was. And I remember one time I would, a real quick story. My principal, I had to start having lunch with my principal of my school. Wasn't a bad kid. I just was a mischievous kid, like to try different things, And I did not know at the time that my father was a doctor that was treating her. So one day sometimes my dad, when he would see patients, I would go to his office and the principal walked in and he did not realize that I had lunch with her every day. And he looked to the principal. He goes, "This is my son. Do you know him?" And boy, she saved my life. There was a moment of silence, and she goes, "No, I never met him before. Good to meet you." And I was like, I owed her the rest of my life for that because I was like, my God,
She could have thrown you under the bus, or at least she did not throw you under the bus. Use that old expression and everything. I did have a quick question for you, Steve, because I know one of your pet projects or one of the things you love is infrastructure and infrastructure improvement. And I know not being a driver, but having friends that are drivers and definitely getting around, whether it's on buses or with friends' cars and everything, that some of our bridges and some of our roads are a mess. So President Joe Biden has said that he's going to distribute billions of dollars to repair or replace the bridges around the nation. And he said that he's going to be handing out $27 billion in funding to fix or rebuild thousands of bridges. I think both me and Nick know that there are some bridges here in North Carolina that need fixing and all of that. But I'm just wondering your thoughts of this attempt to fix our bridge system in the United States.
Great. I mean, I think we all can agree that the one good thing is that this was a bipartisan success. The $1 billion solid infrastructure bill and roads and bridges were a big part of that. I think it's money put to good use. I think we need safer bridges and we need to upgrade them, and we need also better transit service. So I know there's lots of money going towards trains and transit. The other area we don't talk about is water infrastructure. Many of the water and sewer systems are very behind and very old. And to do economic development, you need water. Companies are growing to support businesses and restaurants. So these are things I think that we need to do, and hopefully we can make it happen. So but I agree. I think, and I don't know what the infrastructure like in Canada, Sasha, but you know, obviously, hopefully you believe in supporting bridges, but uh, what are your thoughts about infrastructure in general?
Oh, it's necessity, in my opinion. You can't live with 60 years old infrastructure for how long? For another 10 years, 20 maybe? I doubt it. I think everything will start falling apart, and there will be no infrastructure left at all. And all you will do, I think, you will just stay home and play chess online. That's it.
Hey,
Which
that's
you,
what
which
you
you
do on
could
a
do.
regular basis, Sasha. But that's a great thing and everything. But Nick, there is talk of there being some electric vehicle chargers involved in that. I think that they're saying something like 500,000. And while I think bridges need to be fixed, I don't know. Do we really think that we're going to actually get a network of 500,000 electric vehicle chargers around the country? And is that actually going to work?
That's
Yeah, if you got the money, you're going to get the honey, and apparently they have the money. This is
put it in perspective before we
yeah.
go to the final issue of the day. There's only 43,000 electrical vehicle stations, charging stations today. So it's going to be tough to get 500,000, but I wish the president well in that, and I do believe we need it. We need more charging stations if we're going to get more people to buy electric vehicles, if we're going to make it more affordable to buy electric vehicles, which hopefully we'll do. Then to reduce carbon emissions, we need to also have more charging stations. I personally would not buy an electric car because when I'm empty on gas, I want to know that I can go to a gas station and I can fill her up. And the fact is, right now, I can't even imagine where I would go around. If I'm driving on the interstate on 40 or 440. I guess there's apps you can get that would tell me where I can get, but it'd be sort of a pain rather than just seeing a gas station on the exit, right? So,
Yeah.
and
How long does it take to do your charge? I've never had one of these vehicles. So let's imagine I go to an EV station with my car. I plug it in. Do I have to wait an hour or 2 hours or to get my car charged? I don't know
how much
the
is that? I
game.
don't,
Does anyone
It
know?
used to be 5 hours. Now it's less
5 hours?
than that. Yeah, it's
Oh,
less.
great. Okay, so Sasha, what you're saying is I'm going across the country. I'm going to stop in Atlanta, Georgia to get charged. I'm going to be there for 5 hours.
hey, I got a great idea. So what
How's
if?
this going to work?
Hey, I have a great business idea. Don't tell the guys at Shark Tank this, but what if a company started to you could start a service around. Well, okay, the first thing is you would put electric charging stations at coffee shops. And so if it took like 2 hours or 5 hours, then you would go in and you would be able to have a coffee. You could use Wi-Fi. You're helping small businesses, right? And that would be sort of cool.
Well, yeah. I'm wondering where they're going to put these because the thing is, can you imagine you're in the middle of a desert? Here's my electric vehicle charging station. I'm going to stop here and sweat for the next 5 hours while I'm waiting for my bloody car to charge.
Russia
don't know
could
how
be another business idea could be on your way from, let's see, where are you driving from, say, New York to Los Angeles, for example, right? So on its way, you will build super hotels with the charging stations. So people will stop, go to sleep for a few hours. In the meantime, their car is charged, and they go to next super hotel, stay there for a few hours, take a rest, go to sleep. Oh, your car is charged already. Actually, they have a special buzzer to notify you that your car is charged. You go hop in the car, drive for a few hours, and then another super hotel, and you get sleep again. So you will be rested. You will have contribute to good environment, and that's maybe a new way to travel.
Yeah,
Hey,
and
these are
don't be
interesting
surprised if
ideas
that's
you've
what
got.
happens. Sasha, don't be surprised if hotels start having EV stations so that
Right.
and they advertise,
I think
"Hey, spend the night at the Holiday Inn while you charge your car." Don't be surprised if that's going to be the future.
And free of
Uh,
charge.
the
and
final, yeah,
yeah, and
Well,
free
I
of
see
charge.
that
They'll
as
build it
I
into
see
the
that as being
hotel
part of
room.
the charge, and they'll probably add that as part of the
That'll
cost. I wish
that'll be
Kimberly.
part of your resort
Right, part of the
fee.
reason for the cost and everything. I wish
Okay.
Kimberly was here because one of the other things that they said in the whole infrastructure bill is about high speed internet. So apparently, the federal Communications Commission, our big friends sometimes, not
65
always
billion.
our big friends,
65
the
billion.
FCC has launched a program that is providing subsidies. I love these subsidies of up to $30 a month for low-income households to access broadband. So they're going to give them $30 in a subsidy, and I'm trying to figure out what broadband you're going to get for $30, but that's what they said. They're going to give them $30 a month and $100 toward the purchase of a laptop, tablet, or a desktop computer.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, and I think that we talked about the last mile, which is getting this rural rural connectivity and broadband in rural areas. But this affects education. With more remote work, you can't work, and so I think deploying this kind of broadband is critical. I think, and I look at broadband today as important as road infrastructure. We've used the word in the past when the internet was coming along on the infrastructure highway, and I think this could be a similar type of investment, right? Now, I don't know what efforts are being made in Canada, but in other parts of the world, I know that we can't really function without internet. We wouldn't be on this show right now if we didn't have good Wi-Fi.
And
Right?
speaking of which, Sasha, have you heard anything about what's going on in the Ukraine? Because apparently, the article that I heard from one of our national networks is that they're expecting a cyber attack before the Russian invasion. So that's how I'm kind of looping those two together and everything. But have you heard anything new from the Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russian situation?
Yeah, there are cyber attacks of great magnitude, and you should have expected that to happen because Putin cannot lose his face. His bluff was called out, so now he has to proceed with bluff continuation. It's like in a poker game. When you started bluffing, you cannot stop. You must continue your bluff. And so I don't know his skills in poker, but so far looks like they're quite considerable. And if he's a good student of the game, he will continue this bluff continuation. The only thing is, a bad thing about bluff continuation is that eventually, when your bluff will ultimately called out, you will lose way much more money that if you only bluffed once, it's been called, and then you just stop there. Now, if you have continuation bluff, then you may lose way more money. So Putin, I think he's taking a risk. Now, don't forget that if he's not going for a full-scale invasion and just stop at this cyber attacks, they don't cost him a lot of money, yet create a lot of disruption, create a psychological warfare on Ukrainians. And but the only thing is, I don't understand at what point he'll stop his bluff. That remains to be seen. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I hear you on that.
But did you hear the latest? What he wanted to do is he wanted to put the missiles in. Oh no, they want to start putting troops in Cuba and Venezuela. Sasha. In other words, his response, which I thought was quite interesting to the American response in Ukraine, was, well, how would you like Russian troops in Cuba and Venezuela? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, that's what they actually said.
I think it's a very logical decision. If a U.S. can supply troops to members of NATO, and don't forget that it soon will be Finland and Sweden will be also. And Finland is from St. Petersburg. It's a 2 hours car ride. I'm not sure about the rockets, how much time it will take, or supersonic jets. So it's.
I mean, Russian troops in Cuba, I wouldn't have a problem with because there's plenty in Brooklyn, New York right now, and on the West Coast. So why not put them in Cuba? They're just have a little bit closer.
Well, the last issue of the day is just what what we call here at PBS a dessert topic, and it's about the Maya Angelou being on the coin. Some critics, some people say, I'll start with Mark Lee. number one, what did Maya Angelou mean to you? Do you think she's worthy of being on the American court? I personally do believe that she's a
Oh no,
great.
she's definitely worthy of being on the coin. She was an amazing poet, an amazing woman. Actually, my mom had the pleasure of working with her. I think on a board or an agency. I don't remember what the agency was, but I have to ask mom about that. But I do know that they had some times that they were in the same room and all of that, especially when mom was in Winston-Salem, and she's now in another part of the state and is now retired. But when she was at Z. Smith Reynolds, that's also where Maya was at that time. So definitely an amazing poet, an amazing woman, an amazing civil rights in her own way icon with what she was writing about, and some of that was around definitely civil rights, but also around women's rights and things along that line. So definitely, I think that she was a truly amazing person. I've had trying to think if I ever met her personally, but I do know, like I said, mom met her, and several of my friends have met her, and some have even worked with her. So everybody that I have talked to that knew her said that she was truly an amazing person, and I definitely have no problem with her being on that coin and everything. I mean, there are probably some people, and we're gonna have to revisit this issue at some point. That might have not liked some of the things that she said in her books, and they might want to censor her and all of that because censorship apparently, Nick, and I would love to hear your thoughts about Maya as well. But apparently, censorship is back in the news because there's a group called No Left Turn that wants U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland to demand an investigation across the country of the materials that are in our schools. And we do know that there was a book, I believe it was in Singapore, that was recently dealing with some censorship and because of things that were said about that Asian country in the book and all of that. So it seems like censorship's back in the news in 2022. So we got to revisit the censorship issue as well.
Yes, I think we do have to.
It's good to have cancel culture.
Real quickly, Nick. There's been talk about her being on the tail side of the coin versus the head side of the coin. Do you think that's a bit of a stretch?
Okay, come on, Steve, Mark. Let's get real. People don't hardly use coins today, so it'd be better if you really want to get some love to Maya Angelou. She needs to be on a Bitcoin, not a coin, a Bitcoin. Or she needs to be on a credit card. People today use credit cards, Bitcoins to pay for things. They don't use coins. So if you put her on, you don't put her on, who cares? But if you said she's going to be on the front of a MasterCard, okay, that's a whole different story.
Sasha, do you know much about Maya Angelou, or have you not followed her much?
No, not really. I'm I'm very curious to find out what's.
She was a great poet, and she wrote a famous poem called "Raised in the Sun." Her claim to fame, one of her greatest poets, was "Rise," where she basically talked about her famous quote, "I am the dream, I am the hope of the slave," and really talked about the downtrodden and that self-esteem would carry her through. And then she also gave I still have a hard time understanding that one, but she was a poet laureate at President Bill Clinton's first inauguration, where she talked about the mastodon and different things like that, right? So, Google her and find out, and we'll see. We got more.
She was an American.
She was an American.
She didn't get up to Canada. And that's the other thing. Her love doesn't transpire out to the international universe like Pod TV is going to do and is doing right now. In other words, how well do we play in Lithuania? What do they know?
This show for World Edition, for those of you listening, this is going to be, we're going to be bringing in guests and we're going to be having conversation, but we're going to be a station on the Roku network that's going to be having an honest conversation with people from different perspectives, almost like The View, but The View from kind of, I got my coffee here, and have a talk, but have a talk where it's just not a journalist or host coming in and just, mandating or bashing one party versus the other. So hopefully we can have some good conversations. We can learn from each other and, bring some civility back and we miss Shaquille Latimer. Hopefully he'll be back. And we love his takes on things. But this is a real deal, folks. We're on the Roku TV. I see it. I haven't seen our show yet, but
you can't see the shows, and it won't be live till March the 1st. But you can actually register right now on Roku and see the icon and see the building.
Does World Edition show up there? Does World Edition show up still?
Not yet, not to my knowledge, but eventually it's going to be built in also. So all the shows will be on Roku. But you can actually register right now. So somebody could register right now on Roku and get the icon and see the building as it takes place.
So you need to put Pod TV, and this way you register. Because
Actually, what you do is how you do it is you type in Pod TV into your Roku search engines. I think you did that already, didn't you, Steve?
I did,
Okay, yeah. You type Pod TV into your Roku search engines,
and it comes
and
in.
it'll come out. Yeah, right. So it's already there. Except all the shows, most of them are Mark Lee shows. There are 11 of them. Last time I looked,
Yes,
but they're not
something
live.
that I work on.
They circle around. We're not going live till March the 1st, but then we should have our 65 shows on beaming live around the world. Apparently Roku beams in a lot of places. They sent me a little thing. They have Roku Honduras. They have Roku Costa Rica. They have Roku everywhere. So.
And by the way, speaking back on one of her most popular films is actually popular poems is actually a poem that was recognized by a lot of people, even in the international community, because it is a poem about women and the power of being a woman and not necessarily following in the model standard of beauty. And that is a poem called Phenomenal Woman. And she actually starts the poem by saying, "Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size." And then it goes on beyond
that's
that.
Way too bad. That's way too bad. Fashion model
I think
size.
if you are talking about to international audience,
Yeah.
I think you can't omit the latest news about Novak Djokovic and his participation or non-participation in Australian Open. So the latest was that the visa was revoked. He is going to stay in deportation hotel starting tonight. And he has time until Sunday. Actually, on Sunday, looks like his lawyers will make their final appeal. But I'm very skeptical. And see, another problem is that no player voiced his voice in the defense of Djokovic.
Yeah,
no
one. And I think it's sad because at this point, you're playing for a Grand Slam, playing for history. One more, and he's for now the all-time Grand Slam winner. Mm-hmm. This has got to be getting in his head. I mean, this is a guy that trains like a beast. He's out there hitting the court, and he's more worried about visa. It's almost like, why don't you go ahead and just take the shot and just be done with it, right? But I don't think he'll be playing the Australian Open, and I think it'd be nice to just see the Novak get one more and just.
It would be great to see. It would be great to see that.
I don't feel sorry for him at all. I mean, think about what an elitist this guy is. He goes, "Dare touch my perfect Serbian body," and then it even goes even further. It's like all the people that do defend him. It's always like, I'm a better person than anybody else in the world. I mean, he really honestly believes he's better than everybody. I think it's a great thing the Aussies send that joker packing back.
I know we get ready to wrap up, and we actually got to toss it back to Steve to close everything out. But one thing I was going to say is that, from what I've heard, nobody's been really able to figure out the exact reasoning behind him not wanting to get the shot. Like, there's not been any sort of reasoning going on. Like, sometimes people will give you their personal reasons, their other reasons, but other than the fact that he has very much of a holistic lifestyle, which is not really a reason, but I haven't heard an actual explanation in the sense of being, because some of the other anti-people or people that are not for the shot, I've heard reasons that they have that are,
Did you hear the garbage that came out of Serbia? He's the best athlete in the world. I puked about listening to the Serbian garbage.
You know,
forget it. I mean,
it's time to
one of the top players in the world, the Greek player.
The crazy Greek guy.
You know what he says? He says that essentially by refusing get vaccinated, he's making a fool of all other players who got vaccinated. And some of them wanted to be vaccinated. Some of them did it just to participate in Australian Open.
Right.
Because they are fools, they got vaccinated. And Djokovic says, no, I don't need vaccination.
No, he doesn't because the thing is, it created, this racism, elitism causes a lot of problems in Serbia and Yugoslavia. They honestly believe they're better than everybody else, and he's better than everybody else. He needs to take a hike. I hope the Aussies send his little butt packing and back. He's not better than everybody.
We are all out.
He's just another
Oh,
human being. That's it.
We're all out of time.
I
We
mean,
have to move to close out, folks. I'm sorry. We'll
yeah.
be talking about Novak Djokovic next week as we prepare for the French Open. My final thoughts today, as we close out the show, I'm going to have to condense it since we've gone over time, is we're all getting ready to celebrate the life and legacy of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We will gather at breakfasts and vigils and prayer breakfasts and remember his great speech, remember the great leadership that he provided our nation of a dream that we all shared as Americans, that we could sit together at the table of brotherhood, and that in our country, race, ethnicity, faith, and today sexual orientation and gender should play no role in our freedom as Americans. My challenge today to those of you watching in the US, but also around the world, is to not only remember that King was a great man who made great speeches, but as I remind my children, the way he lived his life, a life of purpose and conviction. We often treat these American heroes or global heroes, even like Gandhi or Desmond Tutu or others, as great figures and great leaders who were doing things that were popular at the time. But we have to remember that Dr. King, many of the civil rights leaders that marched by his side, including Floyd McKissick Sr., who we're going to talk about on Monday, Jesse Jackson, Andrew Young, the former mayor of Atlanta, and ambassador to the UN, they were not popular at the time. They experienced humiliation, embarrassment, ridicule, and fought so hard. And I forgot to mention John Lewis. And so this is something we must remember as we celebrate Dr. King. Remember that he lived a life of purpose, that he didn't like his society and his country the way it was, and so he fought hard for change. And we must remember the sacrifices those made that came after him to continue that fight. That is something we must remember as Americans as we try to come together to pass voting rights legislation, the John Lewis Freedom Act, and remember that it's this light and love of our hearts that will always serve as our true GPS. That is my closing message today. Let the dream continue to live on, but let it live on for all of us. And let us not forget that just because he is gone doesn't mean that we cannot be our own versions of Dr. King in the year 2021. That's my final message today. We wish you all a very happy MLK Day weekend wherever you are. And on Monday, we will have a special MLK edition here talking with Senator Floyd McKissick. From our family at Pod TV to yours, happy weekend. Be safe wherever you are. And I will see you tomorrow on Monday. Be safe.